Hello. Beep, 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 beep. Morning. How you doing? Oh dear. Here we go. Have you been watching the Peggy thing? Just absolutely bloody bonkers. Beyond the pale. Nuts, crackers, assorted Fruit Loops, and nonsense. So let's do something different. Today, let's praise Kellie J. Kellie J, also known as the Posy Parker, who, on a Substack post, has announced that she's written to the EHRC. This is rather tremendous. Anyway, if you can buy me a coffee, subscribe to my Substack, X, wherever it may be, or come and be a warrior teacher. Join us in October. As I'm now going to explore this because this is rather good. And you know, Kellie J, not backwards in coming forwards. Stalwart, fighter extraordinaire, alongside so many others in this battle, absolutely rigid in her mission to let women speak. So this particular piece of information is called Reporting the EHRC to the EHRC, which is great. So this was on the 21st of July, as you can see there, to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Fleetbank House, 2-6 Salisbury Square, London, followed by the postcode, and a formal complaint about the EHRC's failure to uphold and enforce women's sex-based rights. Now, I read this and then I messaged Kelly just quickly because they used to have a fund at the EHRC that you could use. A fund that you could use to sue people. Right, so I found the link to it. It's still there. It just says that, oh, this one's been done, this one's been done. It doesn't really detail how one can apply for funds to do things. I'd like to apply for funds so that I can sue Manchester City Council into reversing publicly their trans pledge. I wish the EHRC was as open to that, for example, as they seem to be anything that comes to do with race. But again, there is a disparity of arms that is apparent for those of us that are in this sphere, as opposed to those of us who are in others. It's most peculiar. Kelly says, Dear Commissioners, I write to register a formal complaint about the EHRC's prolonged failure to uphold, clarify, and enforce women's sex-based rights under the Equality Act 2010. For years, your organisation has either been silent or actively misleading when it comes to the protected characteristic of sex, frequently conflating it with gender reassignment and wrongly suggesting that males who identify as women must, in all circumstances, be treated as if they are women. This is simply not the law. As you know, this has been clarified recently by the Supreme Court. The Equality Act permits lawful proportionate exclusion of men, regardless of gender identity, from single-sex services, spaces, and associations, where it is a justifiable means of achieving a legitimate aim. These provisions exist to protect women's safety, dignity, privacy, and autonomy. Despite this clarity, the EHRC has failed to defend these rights. Only recently, without any change in the law, have you begun to acknowledge that women may have rights to some spaces that exclude all males. But this belated shift does not undo the institutional harm already inflicted. More importantly, it fails to answer a fundamental question. Why is the EHRC not holding the public bodies and organisations to account when they unlawfully allow men into women-only spaces? What an excellent question there. Excellent question. Straightforward. Let's see what happens in terms of a reply. Posy continues. Kelly continues, whichever you like. The EHRC is not powerless. It has significant legal powers under the Equality Act 2006 2006, interesting, to launch formal investigations, Section 20, issue unlawful act and compliance notices, Section 21 and 31, support strategic litigation and judicial review. Now, there's the bit. That's what when I went to visit their site and look about this fund they've got, support strategic litigation and judicial review. In other words, they will take on or fund, for example, legislation that may bring about precedent, that may change things in such a way that it clarifies or brings about a particular ending. So there's nothing to stop them from doing it. They're also able to enforce the public sector equality duty and publicly call out law-breaking institutions. Yet, says Kellie, you consistently fail to use these powers to protect women when the NHS, councils, schools and prisons adopt policies that unlawfully allow male access to women. Male access to women-only services. You stand by. If sex-based rights cannot be enforced, then they do not exist in practice. Despite your annual budget of 17 million, women are left crowdfunding their own legal defence. So true. It is unconscionable that ordinary women must raise vast sums to assert rights already granted by law, while the very body meant to protect them either stands idle or intervenes against them. Where were you when women lost jobs for stating biological facts? Where were you when violent male offenders were housed in women's prisons? Where were you when rape crisis centres told survivors they couldn't guarantee a female-only counsellor? Where were you when schools throughout the country were lying to children? You were intervening in court proceedings against women, or completely silent. This is a very good point. Where have they been? What is their justification for their inaction? It's so utterly shameful, says Kellie. This is not simply dereliction, it's discrimination. I agree 100% with what Kellie is saying there. This is discrimination, right? They funded X for this person because of race. They funded what them, but they haven't funded any of this, and they should have done. They should have funded. They should be funding almost every case at this point in order to get all this nonsense stopped. It is important to note that this failure has not been a recent or isolated occurrence. As early as 2018, the EHRC began issuing guidance such as its Gender Reassignment, a guide for employers, that promoted the unlawful view that males who identify as women must be treated as women in all contexts, regardless of the exceptions permitted under the Equality Act 2010. This guidance downplayed or ignored the sex-based provisions in Schedule 3 of the Act and contributed directly to unlawful policy changes across the workplace, public service, and institutions. By misrepresenting the law and omitting critical legal exemptions, the EHR actively encouraged widespread breaches of women's rights. This was not a passive error, but a deliberate ideological intervention that has led to discriminatory practice being adopted under the false impression that they were legally required. It's quite astounding that anyone working at the EHRC could sleep at night. It's impossible to even contemplate how a body set up to enforce the Equality Act 2010 could get it so very wrong. Let Women Speak is a grassroots movement born out of necessity because the EHRC has abdicated its role. Women are now forced to do what your institution refuses to do: defend sex-based rights and stand up to the silencing of truth. We also write because we can no longer tolerate the NHS, police, education system and local authorities ignoring the Equality Act with impunity. If these bodies are not held to account with real enforcement, your regulatory function is meaningless. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Go and have a read. This is good stuff. From Kellie. Go and have a read. I'll put the links in the doobries for you so that you can read the rest of it. It's interesting. And I'll be very interested to see what the results of it will be. But keep fighting, folks. Keep going. Go on, Kellie. Hey! I love it. Keep scrapping, madam. Keep scrapping. Go on, I'll see you later. Ta-da!